It was the silence that got to me first. Not the kind that comes from comfort, the quiet companionship of two people who know each other too well to fill every moment with words. No, this silence was different. It was loaded, thick with something unspoken, something missing. Lillian and I had been together for almost 10 years. I knew her habits, her quirks, the way she hummed when she cooked, the way she pulled at her sleeves when she was nervous. I knew the small things, the details that made her who she was. And yet, lately, it felt like I was living with a stranger. It started with little things. She'd get home later than usual, always with the same tired excuse. Work ran late. Deadlines. A last-minute meeting. But she stopped complaining about it, like she used to. No more rants about her incompetent boss. No more exhausted sighs as she collapsed onto the couch. Just a simple explanation, too simple, followed by her slipping off to bed without another word. Then came the distance. She wasn't just physically absent, she was emotionally gone too. I tried to talk to her over breakfast, but she'd barely look up from her phone. The same woman who used to laugh at my terrible jokes now barely reacted when I spoke. Our conversations had become transactional. Did you feed the dog? Did you take out the trash? I have a meeting tomorrow, don't wait up. It felt like I was waiting for something. A breaking point, maybe. A confirmation of the fear creeping up my spine. Then, one night, it happened. I was sitting at the dinner table alone, her untouched plate of food growing cold across from me, when my phone buzzed. A text from her. Stuck at work. Don't wait up. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. The same excuse again, but something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to just sit there and accept it anymore. So, I grabbed my keys, got in my car, and decided to find out the truth for myself. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white as I stared at the road ahead. My heart pounded in my chest, a sickening rhythm that matched the storm of thoughts swirling in my mind. Was I overreacting? Was I letting paranoia get the best of me? Maybe. But that text, stuck at work. Don't wait up. Felt different this time. It wasn't just the excuse itself, but the way it landed. Cold. Final. Like she wasn't even trying anymore. I pulled out of the driveway, my pulse racing as I headed toward Lillian's office building. The city lights cast long shadows over the streets, and I tried to convince myself that I was about to confirm my own foolishness. That I'd drive by and see her car in its usual spot, that she'd really be inside, grinding away at some last-minute project like she always said. But deep down, I already knew that wouldn't be the case. When I arrived, my stomach twisted. The parking lot was half empty, dimly lit by flickering streetlights. And Lillian's car? Nowhere in sight. I pulled into a space, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard that my fingers ached. Maybe she parked somewhere else? Maybe she had stepped out for a late dinner with colleagues? I checked my phone. No new messages. Something felt wrong. I could have turned back. I could have driven home and forced myself to believe she had a reasonable explanation. But I didn't. Instead, I sat there, staring at the entrance of her office building, trying to figure out my next move. Then, I saw him. A man, tall, broad-shouldered, stepping out of the building's side entrance. His dress shirt was slightly wrinkled, his tie loosened, like he had just ended a long day at work. He wasn't in a rush. If anything, he looked satisfied. And then, 2 seconds later, Lillian followed him out. I froze. She was smiling. Not just any smile, but the kind I hadn't seen in months. The kind she used to give me. She reached for his arm, touching him lightly as she said something I couldn't hear. He laughed, and they walked toward a sleek black car parked near the exit. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. This wasn't a business meeting. This wasn't a late work emergency. This was something else. My chest tightened, and my mind screamed at me to do something. To storm out of my car, to call her name, to demand an explanation. But I didn't. Instead, I watched as she climbed into the passenger seat, the man shutting the door behind her before sliding into the driver's seat. The car pulled out of the lot, merging onto the main road. I hesitated for half a second. Then, without thinking, I threw my car into gear and followed them. I kept my distance, my hands trembling on the steering wheel as I trailed them through the city. The roads were quieter at this hour, but my head was anything but. Every possible explanation raced through my mind, each one worse than the last. Was this just a work dinner? A casual drink between colleagues? Or was it exactly what it looked like? They drove for nearly 15 minutes, weaving through the streets before pulling into a small, upscale bar. The kind of place that had dim lighting, expensive cocktails, and an unspoken promise of privacy. I parked a few spaces away, my breath shallow. Lillian stepped out first, her heels clicking against the pavement. The man, whoever he was, walked beside her, his hand grazing the small of her back. She didn't flinch, didn't pull away. If anything, she leaned into it. I swallowed hard. I had two choices. I could leave, pretend I never saw any of this, go home and wait for her to return with another lie on her lips. Or I could walk inside and face the truth. I took a deep breath, opened my car door, and stepped out. The night air felt thick, pressing down on me as I stepped out of my car. My pulse was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Every part of me screamed to turn around, to go home and pretend I never saw anything. But I knew that if I walked away now, I'd never be able to live with myself. I needed to see it, really see it. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, took a steadying breath, and headed toward the bar's entrance. The moment I stepped inside, I was hit with a low hum of jazz music, the kind meant to drown out hushed conversations. The lighting was dim, golden, casting flickering shadows across the room. Couples sat in intimate booths, their faces close, their hands lingering over wine glasses. And then there she was, Lillian. She was sitting in a corner booth, tucked away just enough that someone might overlook her if they weren't looking closely. But I was looking. Her back was to me, but I knew that silhouette anywhere. The way she tilted her head when she listened, the way she ran a hand through her hair when she was comfortable, relaxed. And across from her, the man. He leaned in slightly, his body language dripping with familiarity. Their drinks had already been served. Hers was a red wine, his a whiskey on the rocks. I watched as he said something, and she laughed. Not just any laugh. It was that genuine, effortless laugh, the one she hadn't given me in months. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. A sick feeling crawled up my spine, a nauseating realization that I wasn't just imagining things. She wasn't stuck at work. She was here, drinking, smiling, flirting, and I was nothing more than an afterthought. I wasn't reckless enough to storm up to them, not yet. Instead, I moved to the bar, sliding onto a stool just far enough away that I could still observe without drawing attention. The bartender glanced at me. "What can I get you?" "Whiskey," I said, my voice tighter than I expected. "Neat." He nodded and turned away, and I shifted my focus back to Lillian. She was leaning in closer now, her hand resting on the table between them. The man smirked, reaching out, and I watched, helplessly, as his fingers lightly traced over hers. I gritted my teeth. They weren't just co-workers. They weren't just friends. This was intimate. I took a sip of my drink, my throat burning as I forced myself to stay put. I needed to know more. Who was he? How long had this been going on? Then, as if fate wanted to twist the knife a little deeper, I saw her pick up her phone. She unlocked the screen, tapped out a message, and within seconds, my own phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, my breath catching as I read the words. "Working late again. Love you. Don't wait up." I nearly crushed the glass in my hand. The audacity, the casualness of it. As if she wasn't sitting there, lying to my face while her fingers still rested in another man's hand. My vision blurred for a moment, rage and heartbreak warring inside me. I set the glass down carefully, swallowing the storm rising in my chest. I had my confirmation. Now, I had to decide what to do next. I stared at the message on my phone, my hands trembling as I tried to process the sheer boldness of her lie. "Love you. Don't wait up." She was mocking me. That realization settled in my gut like lead. It wasn't just that she was here with him. It was that she was so comfortable in her deception that she could send me a text, pretending she was at work while she was sitting right in front of me, flirting with another man. My grip tightened around the glass. Every rational part of me told me to stay calm, to think before I acted. But another part of me, The part that had been ignored for months. The part that had been waiting for proof. Wanted to walk over there and rip the illusion apart right in front of her. I forced myself to take a slow breath. No, not yet. If I made a scene, she'd twist the story. She'd gaslight me. Tell me I was being irrational, paranoid, that I had no proof. But now? Now I had proof. I needed more. I signaled the bartender. Hey, I said, keeping my voice casual, do you know that guy over there? I tilted my head slightly toward Lillian's companion. The bartender glanced over, shrugged. Yeah, he comes in sometimes. Think his name's Marshall. Works in some big corporate firm downtown. Marshall. The name meant nothing to me. I had never heard Lillian mention it. Not as a co-worker, not as a client, not as a friend. Which meant one thing. She had been hiding him. My stomach twisted. How long had this been going on? Had I been this blind? I turned my attention back to them, watching as Lillian leaned in just a little closer. I could see it in her body language now. The ease, the way she touched her hair, the way she smiled, the way she used to smile at me. Something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to let her keep feeding me lies. I took one last sip of my drink, then stood up, adjusting my jacket. My pulse pounded in my ears as I walked across the room, closing the distance between us in just a few steps. For a split second, neither of them noticed me. They were too lost in their little world, in whatever story they had been weaving together behind my back. Then, Lillian's eyes flicked upward, and everything changed. She froze. Her entire body stiffened as if she had just been caught in a crime scene. Her eyes widened, her lips parting slightly, but no words came out. Marshall turned his head, his expression shifting from amusement to confusion. He didn't recognize me. Of course, he didn't. Why would he? To him, I was just some stranger. But to her, I was the husband she had just lied to, and I could see the panic settling in. I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table between them. The screen was still lit, displaying the message she had sent me just minutes ago. Working late again. Love you. Don't wait up. Silence. Thick. Suffocating. Lillian swallowed hard. Conrad, Go on, I said, my voice eerily calm. Tell me about your long night at work. Marshall glanced between us, realization slowly dawning in his eyes. He shifted uncomfortably, straightening in his seat. Wait, you're her husband? I didn't even look at him. All my focus was on Lillian. Her face was pale now, her confidence crumbling. She opened her mouth, then shut it, scrambling for a response, for a way out. But there was no way out. She had spent months weaving a web of deception, and now she was tangled in it. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice. How long? Lillian shook her head quickly. Conrad, it's not what it looks like. I let out a dry, humorless laugh. The audacity. Even now, even with my proof staring her in the face, she was still lying. I'll ask again, I said, my voice sharper this time. How long? Her fingers twitched on the table. She glanced at Marshall like he might save her, but he was already pulling away, suddenly realizing he was in the middle of something he hadn't prepared for. Then, in the smallest, weakest voice, she whispered, a few months. My chest tightened. I had suspected it, feared it, but hearing it out loud, it was like a knife being driven into my ribs. I stepped back, straightening. Wow, I said, letting out a slow breath. That's longer than I thought. Lillian's eyes filled with desperation. Conrad, please, let's just... I held up a hand. No, don't. You made your choice. I turned on my heel, my heart hammering so hard I thought I might collapse right there. I didn't make a scene. I didn't yell. But the damage was done. And for the first time in months, I was the one walking away. I walked out of that bar without looking back. The moment the doors swung shut behind me, the cold night air hit me like a slap. But I welcomed it. It was grounding, real, unlike the illusion I had been living in for months. I didn't get into my car right away. Instead, I stood on the sidewalk, staring at the neon glow reflecting off the wet pavement, trying to process what had just happened. She admitted it. A few months. Those words were still ringing in my head, looping over and over like a broken record. I had spent so much time doubting myself, convincing myself that I was just being paranoid, that I was the problem. But in the end, I had been right all along. Lillian had been lying to my face. Every late night, every dismissive excuse, every fake smile, and I let it happen. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. No, I hadn't let it happen. I had trusted her, and that trust had been nothing more than a weapon she used against me. My phone buzzed. I already knew who it was before I even looked. Lillian. Conrad, please, let's talk. Another buzz. Lillian, where are you? Please, just let me explain. Explain what? That she had thrown away nearly a decade of marriage for some guy named Marshall? That she had been coming home to me every night after being with him? That every time she kissed me, held my hand, told me she loved me, it was all a lie? I squeezed my eyes shut, gripping my phone so hard I thought I might crack the screen. I needed space. Without another thought, I silenced my phone, climbed into my car, and drove. I didn't go home. The idea of walking into that house, our house, felt unbearable. So instead, I found myself pulling into the empty parking lot of a 24-hour diner, a place I hadn't been to in years. I used to come here in college, back when Lillian and I were just kids, sitting in these very booths at 2 a.m., dreaming about the future. Funny, I slid into a booth near the window, staring blankly at the laminated menu in front of me. I wasn't hungry, but I needed somewhere to sit, to think, to let the weight of the night settle in. A waitress approached. What can I get you, hon? I looked up at her, blinking. Just coffee. She gave me a knowing look. The kind people give when they can tell you've been through something. Rough night? I let out a breath. Yeah. She nodded like she understood, then walked off to grab my coffee. I stared out the window, my thoughts spiraling. What now? Was this the end of my marriage? Was this really it? Part of me still wanted to believe there was something left to salvage, that we could fix it, that there was some explanation I hadn't considered. But another part of me, the part that had been ignored for far too long, knew better. Lillian wasn't sorry she had cheated. She was sorry she had gotten caught, and that was an entirely different thing. I wrapped my hands around the warm coffee mug as the reality of my situation settled in. I had a decision to make, and this time, it wasn't going to be her choice. The coffee had gone cold. I hadn't touched it in nearly 20 minutes, just staring at the swirling patterns of cream on the surface. My mind was a tangled mess, replaying every moment of the night over and over, trying to make sense of it. Lillian had admitted to the affair. That should have been enough. Enough to make me walk away without hesitation. Enough to hate her. But I didn't feel anger, not yet. What I felt was emptiness. The kind that creeps in when something that once held meaning is suddenly hollow. My phone sat face down on the table, but I could feel it buzzing against the surface. I didn't have to check to know who it was. She wasn't done with me. And I wasn't done with her, not yet. I exhaled slowly, then picked up my phone, flipping it over. 12 missed calls. 9 unread messages. I scrolled through them, my chest tightening. Lillian. Conrad, please, pick up. I just want to talk. Lillian. I messed up, okay? But I need you to hear me out. Lillian. You don't understand everything. Just let me explain. Explain what? That she had been sleeping with another man for months, while coming home to me every night? That she had looked me in the eyes and told me she loved me while lying through her teeth? I clenched my jaw, my fingers gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. And then, the last message came through. Lillian, I'm at home. Please, come back. I need to see you. I stared at the words, my heartbeat drumming in my ears. She was waiting for me. I had a choice. I could ignore her, let her sit in that house alone, stewing in the mess she had made. Or, I could go back. And I wanted to go back. Not because I wanted to forgive her. Not because I wanted to save our marriage. I just needed to see her. To look her in the eyes one last time and know if there was even a shred of the woman I once loved still left inside her. I pulled into the driveway just after 2 a.m. The house was dark, except for a single light glowing from the living room window. I sat in the car for a long moment, staring at that warm, familiar glow. This was our home, the place where we had spent years building a life together. Now, it felt like a stranger's house. I finally stepped out, my legs heavy, my heart a dead weight in my chest. As I approached the front door, I hesitated. A deep breath, a silent moment of preparation. Then, I pushed it open. She was there, sitting on the couch, her arms wrapped around herself, her hair a mess. She had been crying. I could see it in her red, swollen eyes, the way she sniffled when she saw me. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "You came back." I didn't sit down, didn't take off my jacket. I just stood there, staring at her. "Why?" I asked. Lillian blinked, confused. "What? Why did you do it?" My voice was steady, but inside, I was anything but. "Why, Marshall? Why now? Why any of this?" She swallowed hard, looking down at her hands. Don't say you don't know." My tone sharpened, surprising even myself. "You made a choice. A deliberate, conscious choice. So tell me why." Her breath hitched, and for a moment, I thought she might actually answer. But then, she said something that made my stomach turn. "I never meant to hurt you." I let out a short, bitter laugh. "Really?" I took a slow step forward. "So you just accidentally ended up in another man's bed?" Her face crumpled, and she wiped at her eyes. "It wasn't like that." I scoffed. "Then tell me what it was like, Lillian. Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like that." She let out a shaky breath. "It started small, just conversations. He listened to me. He made me feel seen. I felt something crack inside me. And I didn't." She shook her head quickly. "It's not that, Conrad. It's just," her voice broke. "I don't know when we stopped being us." Her words should have mattered. Maybe a few months ago, they would have. Maybe I would have fought for an explanation. Fought for us. But not anymore. Because she didn't fight for me. And I wasn't going to fight for her. I exhaled, stepping back. "I don't care, Lillian." She froze, looking at me like I had just shattered whatever fragile hope she had been clinging to. I shook my head. "I don't care why. I don't care about him. I don't care about the excuses." Her lip trembled. "Conrad, I just needed to hear it from you," I cut in. "And now I have." Silence. Thick. Heavy. Lillian's breath hitched. "What does that mean?" I reached into my pocket, pulled out my keys, and set them on the coffee table. "I'm done." Her face drained of color. "No." I turned, walking toward the door. And this time, I didn't look back. The night air was colder than before, or maybe I just felt it more. I walked away from the house, our house, but it didn't feel like mine anymore. It hadn't for a long time. I got in my car and just drove. No destination, no plan, just the quiet hum of the engine and the sound of my own breathing. I should have felt something. Rage. Sorrow. Relief. But all I felt was numb. Lillian had tried to explain herself, but nothing she said changed the simple truth. She chose someone else. And now? I was choosing myself. I ended up at a hotel on the edge of town. The kind of place people stayed when they were passing through, not somewhere they called home. The receptionist barely looked up as I handed over my ID and credit card. "Long night?" she asked casually. I let out a humorless chuckle. "You could say that." She nodded like she'd heard it all before, then handed me my key. Room 214. I took the elevator up, walked into the small, sterile room, and dropped onto the bed, staring at the ceiling. It was over. For the first time, it was really over. My phone buzzed again. I ignored it. It buzzed again, and again. I groaned, grabbing it off the nightstand. "Lillian, you just left? That's it? Lillian, please, Conrad, just talk to me. We can fix this. Lillian, I made a mistake, but we can move past this." I clenched my jaw. She still didn't get it. She thought this was something we could sweep under the rug, something we could fix. But how do you fix something that's already broken beyond repair? I typed a response. We? There is no we anymore, Lillian. I hovered over the send button. Then, with a deep breath, I pressed it. Seconds later, the typing bubbles appeared. I watched them blink in and out, like she was trying to find the right words. But there weren't any. I turned off my phone and set it on the nightstand. For the first time in months, I didn't care what she had to say. The next morning, I woke up to an empty bed and a quiet room. No scent of coffee drifting from the kitchen. No soft murmuring of Lillian talking on the phone. Just silence. And for the first time, it didn't feel lonely. It felt free. I got up, showered, and pulled on a fresh shirt. My phone had dozens of unread messages, but I ignored them as I packed my bag. I had a lawyer to call, and a new life to start. I didn't respond to Lillian again. There was nothing left to say. By noon, I was sitting in a lawyer's office, flipping through the divorce papers that would officially close this chapter of my life. The lawyer, a sharp-looking woman in her 40s, glanced at me over her glasses. "You sure about this?" I let out a slow breath, then nodded. "Yeah, more sure than I've ever been." She slid the paperwork across the desk. "Sign here, and we'll get the process started." I picked up the pen, my fingers steady. Lillian had made her choice. Now, I was making mine. The following weeks were a blur of logistics, moving my things out, cutting financial ties, figuring out what my life looked like without her. And you know what? It felt good. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for someone to come home late, making excuses, or wondering if I was enough. I was enough. One night, as I sat in my new apartment, a small but cozy place across town, I realized something. I wasn't broken. I was free. The weight that had been pressing down on me for so long was gone. And in its place, possibility. I could do anything, go anywhere, start fresh. So I did. I reconnected with old friends. I picked up hobbies I had abandoned. I lived again. And one evening, as I sat in a cafe, sipping coffee and reading a book, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. A woman at the next table caught my eye. She smiled. I smiled back. Maybe I wasn't ready for anything serious. Maybe I just wanted to enjoy the moment. But for the first time since my marriage fell apart, I knew one thing for certain. My life wasn't over. It was just beginning.